Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefuel and welcome to the update of the Toyota RAV4. 1994 was when the Toyota RAV4 first appeared, and it was the world's first compact crossover SUV. Well, the last major remodel took place in 2018, and that was the 5th generation of RAV4. Since then, there have been a few updates that have been brought to bear, and this year sees the first chance for all of those things to come in all at the same time. So, if you're a big fan of the RAV4, it's well worth checking out this review. We're going to take a look at what's changed and take a look at what's still the same and ask ourselves, is an onboard hybrid still the way for you to go? Let's take a closer look and find out. Thanks to safety ratings for pedestrians, there are huge crumple zones that are required on the front of SUVs, and fitting all of that material underneath the front section can lead to rather bulbous looking, unattractive fronts on cars. So I think to a certain extent you really do have to take your hat off a little bit to Toyota for making this look so visually appealing. Those angular lines really do break up the bulk here, and they do make it look a lot more presentable and interesting to the eye. 4 meters 60 or 181 inches in length, the RAV4 sits very nicely within its class. Now, you can get the wheels on this car anywhere from 17 to 19 inches. But if you have a look here, where we have 19-inch wheels, I think you will agree that paired with the coloration on these wheel arches, that looks right for this vehicle. And I can tell you that this size of tyre is actually a pretty comfortable ride as well, but we'll find out more about that a bit later on. We really wanted to be able to bring you somewhere where we could show you just what that two-tone paint job does to the aesthetic of this car. And what better place could we bring it than here? If there's one thing you can say about Toyota, it's that when they tell you that their cars have off-road capability, that is very literally what they mean. 1 meter 69 or 67 inches in height. Again, round at the back, you can really see the visual difference that having a different color roof makes to the rear of the car. SUVs, again, are traditionally pretty bulbous, especially at the back, so I like having that broken down. So this is the next new feature that Toyota have introduced. It has a handless entry to the rear, but we don't have it fitted to this model. So the way that it would work, imagine these hands aren't here, is you wave your foot under the rear, the boot pops up, and then you do the same again to close. That's a particularly handy feature, and I'm very grateful for the fact that Toyota pointed out that this car didn't come with it, or I could have spent quite a bit of time waving my foot underneath. So now we're going to take a look at the inside of the car, but before we do, just a little bit of full disclosure. I'm not only a big Toyota fan, but I'm also an owner and driver long time of a Toyota. Why? Well, let's be really honest about this. Most people, when they buy a Toyota, are not throwing parties the day they buy it and are not telling all of their friends. And the reason is, a lot of the time, we're not buying Toyotas specifically because we're in love with the car. In the case of the RAV4, often it's because when you went through the money, you just couldn't justify the Audi, the Volvo, or even the Porsche that you really, really wanted. Why does any of that matter? Well, because there are lots of things to love about this car, and I do want to rave about them. But there are also a few that aren't so great. Let's take a look inside. As I already said, I'm a big fan of Toyota, so I am genuinely mystified by why they insist on doing this to their interiors. This is not a cheap car, and there are lots of leap forwards in terms of in-car design that leave you with so many options as to how you can approach the whole idea of designing the interior of a car. I don't want to make it seem like I'm complaining too much. It's not that the interior here is unworkable or terrible, and if I owned this car, I would still be laughing about it every day when I thought about how much money I was saving on running costs and servicing and upkeep compared to any of its major competitors. But that doesn't excuse why some of the decisions that have been made in this car. So, if you watched my original review, you may already have experienced a little bit of my feedback on the subject, but if you haven't, let's just take a quick look at what my major gripes are. So to start with, and it's the most obvious one, the infotainment system. Come on guys, surely we can do a bit better than this. These buttons here are reminiscent of a cheap stereo from the 80s. Although there's lots of rubber that's been used throughout to make things more tactile, it just doesn't look right visually, and the materials do not emanate quality when you touch them. There is lots of hard plastic everywhere. And although I don't hugely mind that given the state of the car, in general, I just feel like Toyota could have done a little bit more. Let's take a look at the door by way of example. So if Cornelius takes a bit of a step back, the door looks nice. It looks like it's nicely put together. But as he gets closer in, and bearing in mind you're going to be touching this stuff every single day, you'll notice that it just doesn't feel premium. And to me, that's selling the car short, because the experience of ownership, the experience of driving it, and the experience of looking at it from the outside suggest a higher level of quality. So if you look down here at the speaker grille on the door, for example, and if Cornelius works his magic, he can give that a bit of a bang for you while he's filming it at the same time. What do you think, Cornelius? Can you give it a tap? Nope, I'm going to reach over and do it. Here we go. Whoop. It is exactly what it looks like. So not the worst thing in the world, and maybe styling just isn't the most important thing to you. But I guess for my money and for my heart, I want people to be excited about the cars they buy and the cars that they own. And I think Toyota have done a lot to deliver that in terms of its exterior aesthetic and also its driving and its performance. I just feel they could have done a little bit more with inside. So, griping aside, we're all done with that. There are some positive changes here, not least of which is the new seat design. Now that certainly does add up to looking a lot more quality. It's aesthetically pleasing. You'll know it's a standard gripe of mine. I like that it's easy to clean. It's good that they're using new materials that aren't animal based, and it really represents the car well. So 2 thumbs up from me on that. And here's another touch I really like. New for this edition, if you have a look, we have a black roof liner, and that adds an area of, shall we say, quality and a little bit more style than you may have expected from its predecessor. I think this is a really good example of what I mean when I say that I think a little attention to detail could have been used on the interior. Now, this is my drinking vessel. It travels the world with me, making sure I'm hydrated. And I can tell you that I put this in the door pocket of every single car I test, because as a standard size, it's a really good indicator of how things work when you're actually using them. Now, look at this. I can think of 20 small cars which would take that without any need to disfigure the door liner. I don't know. Am I just complaining too much? Come on guys, tell me, help me out. If you think I'm moaning too much about this interior, let me know. But if you think it could have used a bit more refinement as well, I understand what you're saying. So I think you guys have a pretty good impression of how I feel about the infotainment system. Well, it's not to my taste, but other people might love it. You will notice though, it is not the most responsive or fastest acting system, and the way that the screen is utilized, I think, is particularly rough. If you have a look while you're navigating, you will find that a very small area indeed is actually taken up with the map, and we've found that to be unreliable and unresponsive in actual real-world use. But enough on that, let's come further down. So in a fully digital world, although these might not be the most aesthetically pleasing things, I do appreciate having large tactile knobs to grab hold of while I am driving down or off-road at any kind of speed. It's just nice that the controls are where you need them to be and easy to identify, especially in the dark. As we take a look a little bit further down, you can see that there's a useful 12-volt charge point and next to it a USB addition. Now, you will notice that not all of the features that are in the update are on this car. I think that's important to mention. This is what Toyota describe as a rolling update, and because of that, features come in at different times in different places. Now, there's a good reason for that, but before we get onto those features, I just want to show you a couple of other things. This is an inductive charging pad. As you can see, I like to use Thomas as my wallpaper. I don't think it's the best designed. The S10 is not the world's biggest phone, but as you can see, as an inductive charging pad, there's a bit of an issue with that. So it was a bit hit and miss with my phone. You can switch it on or off from this power button right here. So depending on your phone, that will either work better or worse. Slightly further back, and we come to 2 features I really do like. This is no different than it's ever been, but Toyota really know how to design a rugged, good feeling gear stick. So when you grab hold of this, and I think you're always going to need to feel that you can in any SUV with any off-road capability, it really feels solid, and that makes me happy. This, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Now, in a world where there are a million different mode buttons in all kinds of configurations and you can reach them from anywhere, Somebody put a lot of good thought into this. It's brilliantly straightforward. I used it a lot while driving and I really enjoyed it. Push for normal. How simple is that? You don't have to cycle through anything. You just reach for it and stab at it when you're going down the road. Left twist for eco, right twist for sport. You're not going to forget that. And if I could get Cornelius to focus back on the display again, I really like this. If I push that button, normal, well, what would you think? It gives you a white speed dial. If I twist it to go eco, it gives me a green ring. Brilliant. And what would you expect for sport? Nothing else but red for speed. Excellent. Slightly further back and we can see the main central console with storage and 2 further USB-C charge points. Now, in keeping with those rolling changes that I mentioned earlier, you will find that those are USB-C on some models. You can also find key differences in other new models, such as new LED headlamps. But because Toyota's market is so comprehensive, and if you've ever used a Toyota configurator, you will notice there are about 10,000 different options to pick from anyway. If there's something specific you're looking for, check for it in your market because it may not be globally available. That said, there are so many choices to make. You should be able to find what you're looking for. And if not, one of the best features about Toyota is that you really do expect what you're going to be getting. And at least it's tried, tested and reliable. And if you're buying a car, that's pretty high up the priority list. Our car comes equipped with the style selection trim. That's one underneath the top trim. Coming quite soon, there's going to be an adventure trim. That should make the car look a little bit more off-road capable. But just so you know, the standard seating comes as cloth. So pretty happy with these hybrid seats. And I think overall, you get a pretty good flavour of exactly what Toyota has to offer. Now, having spent all of that time complaining about the front, I think once you get through to the back, you actually do start feeling a little bit more of what you expect from Toyota. These are passenger cars. They're designed for it and they are really thoroughly thought through in terms of getting the best experience possible. What I mean by that is, in many cases, there are going to be children back here. Everything is really easy to keep clean. It's very comfortable and you have lots of space. This seat right here is set for Cornelius. He has long legs and he's over 6 feet in height. I have very short legs, but you can see there is plenty of room here. I can tell you that all of this stuff is very ruggedly put together, which means it's going to take any form of abuse that your children's sports team are going to be able to dish out. And don't worry, they're not going to drive you too nuts when they're back here with their friends, because you do have 2 handy charge points for all the electronics that they are inevitably going to be using while you're driving. Seat is a standard configuration, but there are some nice touches just to make you feel that little bit more comfortable while you're back here. All right, Cornelius, you're not going to catch me out a second time by telling me the boot's automatic. So instead, I'll use the old school approach of just pushing the button. Now, as you would expect from Toyota, with practicality high on the list of why people like them so much, there is a large, spacious boot back here. To be specific, 580 litres, and if you fold those seats down, a maximum of 1,690 litres of load space. That number is actually really important because here we have the onboard hybrid. If you go with the plug-in hybrid, clearly you have to sacrifice a little bit more room in order to make space for the batteries. Then you would be looking at 490 litres as it stands, or 1,604 litres maximum. What's interesting is if you put the 2 cars side by side, the hybrid and the plug-in hybrid, you can't really see where that boot space has gone, but it does matter because the plug-in hybrid has an extra 250 kilograms of batteries, and that's going to make a bit of a difference to your fuel efficiency. However, whichever one you go with, I'm pretty sure you're going to find you have more than enough room back here. Now let's take a look and see what's powering this thing. I think we're starting this one again. Let's take a look and see what's powering this thing. So if you want to go for a hybrid, you are always going to be looking at the same engine, and that's a 2.5 litre VVT all-wheel drive in this case, although you can also get it in front-wheel drive, and that does make a difference. This one comes with 178 horsepower and an 88 kilowatt or 120 horsepower electric motor. That gives you a system output of 222 horsepower. Why is that important? Well, you can also go with the front wheel drive version, and that is going to give you about 4 horsepower less. So I don't specifically know that you will notice it. Now, one of the things that is really important about Toyota is that because they are such an extraordinary global company, the amount of different options that there are, not only with this car, but also with these engines, is hugely dependent on where you live and what's available. So in total, there are 10 to 12 different engine configurations that you can go for, but it completely depends on where you live. The total number of trim levels available for this car is around about 7 or 8, again, depending where you live and depending on what you're going for. The new addition there is the Black Edition. This model we have right here is one below the top model. So all the bells and whistles that we experience on this car are not necessarily standardly available on all. But here's what you need to know. This platform, the hybrid platform, is what is being pushed right now. Why? Obviously carbon emissions, and also the future will be fully electric. So this represents the best in terms of a halfway house that you can get with Toyota at present. Now, up until now, the onboard hybrid, which is what we have here, and that means that the only way of charging the electric system is using the petrol engine, has been the most popular. Toyota think that might be on the cusp of change, so they're really pushing the plug-in model as a different alternative. But there are massively important factors that you should take into account if you're planning on going that route. The first is, and it's the most important one, what sort of driving do you regularly do? Now, the example that we got from one of the guys here at Toyota is that where he lives, he has photovoltaic cells, and 99% of his driving is 20 kilometers or less because he lives close to where he works. So in that instance, clearly the plug-in hybrid is going to be the more environmentally sustainable because he's generating his own power. But if you're doing more highway miles and you're regularly driving further, then this is the better option. Why would that be? Well, if you go for the plug-in hybrid, you experience a lot more weight through additional batteries, and clearly that has a significant impact on fuel efficiency. But conversely, if you go with the onboard system, then obviously you can't charge those batteries unless you're actually driving using the engine. So, when you come to deciding which model you want, ask yourself what are you most likely to be regularly doing with the car. Now, I'm a big fan of the onboard system because I think it represents a good compromise of the best of both worlds. But if I used my car only for short trips, or I lived in a city and really I'm just scooting around that, then the plug-in could make an awful lot of sense. Really, it depends on what's individually best for you. Now we come to the driving section. Well, most people know that the RAV4 dates back to 1994, but what less people know is that their first fully electric model was available from 1997 till 2003. Sadly, it was only available to the general public for 7 months in 2002, because the rest of the time it was only available business to business. But brilliantly, there are still 500 of those alive, well, and in the wild today. All of which is to say that this is hardly Toyota's first venture out with the RAV4 in an electric format. Now, at the moment, it's only available as a hybrid, either in front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive as we have here today. But I'm very certain it won't be long before another fully electric RAV4 is available and on the streets. But for now, the electric hybrid that we're driving on board is 222 horsepower of combined output. And what that results in is quite a surprising amount of pep in the drive. Now, when I was having my little rant earlier on, I did mention that there are pluses and minuses to buying, owning and driving Toyotas. And after you've gotten over a little bit about disappointing interior finishes, then you will recognize that everything you expect a Toyota to deliver is here in leaps and bounds. Also, as I mentioned, one of those things that I've always really enjoyed about Toyota is that when they tell you their cars go off-road, that's very literally what they mean. It is a solid and assured drive. Now, I summed this up earlier to Cornelius, and I don't think it's fair for everyone, but it does sum this car up for me and similar experiences. if I were to go out and buy the car that I really wanted in this segment, see if you can guess which one that would be. You can if you're a regular viewer. Well, then I think I would love it on the first day and maybe in the first week. But after that, as I got a little bit more familiar, maybe I'd start to see a few cracks here and there, and I'd start dreaming of my next car. What I can say from my history of having lived with Toyotas is they are almost completely the reverse. The day you buy one or first get into it, everything you don't like about it is absolutely apparent to you. I hate this infotainment system. Number 2 in my all-time most hated modern infotainment system belongs to Ford. I have no idea why they designed the one in their Fiesta the way that they did, but I find it appalling to use. But I can tell you, next to that, this one is appalling. Nothing about it is pleasing to use. Even if you make allowance for the fact that maybe screen definitions have come on and processors have speeded up and maybe this isn't quite at the top of its game, the usability and the user interface is really poor. There's just nothing about it that's enjoyable to use. Anyway, all of that aside, what I can tell you is that the advantage in driving a Toyota is that the more you drive it, the more it rewards you. No, you will never learn to like the infotainment system, but what you will do is learn to just ignore it. All of the settings that you want, more or less, once you get used to their adjustment and adaptability, will just fade away into nothing. What this car will do is to make you feel happier and happier with the drive the more that you use it. And the reason for that is that it's a very well put together car. Is it the most exciting car you can drive? No. Is it the fastest car in its class you can drive? No. Is it even the most solid car you can drive? No. But what it is really well thought through from top to bottom. This drive feels exactly the way that it should. What do I mean by that? Well, every element of the way that this car interacts with you as a driver is nicely balanced with every other element. So, the seat, it's supportive, it's comfortable. It's not the most sporty seat I've ever sat in. It's not the most dynamic seat. It's not even the most comfortable seat, but it's the best balance of all of those things. And that really is a perfect way of summing up this car. The all-around visibility, it's really great for an SUV. The steering wheel, it's comfortable. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just right. The braking, it's precise, it's not dynamic, it's not sporty, but it really feels reassuring when you stand on it. And the acceleration, well, Toyota have actually done more than enough to make the most out of this hybrid functionality to give you a zip of power that even manages to excite you a little bit in a RAV4, which I don't think is a small achievement. Well, right now you might be thinking to yourself, Brian, this is a driving review, why aren't you moving? We are driving through the Alps, and because of that, I'm a little bit at the whim of traffic, but it has offered us the excellent opportunity to see how this car handles when you start throwing it round. And you know what? It's the same as every other element. This is the Goldilocks of compact SUVs. And the difference between this and another car is that when you start driving in this, you'll get over everything that annoys you about it very quickly indeed. And you'll soon find that there's a reason why at various times in its production run, this has been and remains in many markets the #1 selling SUV in its segment. It's because everything it does well. So you can sit in this car and you can drive it from one end of a continent to the other, and I promise you, you will be happier with it by the time you get to the end than you were at the start. And there simply aren't many cars you can say that about. So the hybrid thing, for example, does it deliver you the perfect balance between power and performance and efficiency? Well, no, not really. There are other cars that do a really better job of it. I mean, it is, after all, an SUV, but the balance is right. It gives you just enough performance to make you really satisfied with the way it handles. The dynamics of the drive are just nicely weighted enough. The suspension firm enough, but not too firm. The steering is heavy enough, but not too heavy. and the power is just as you really need it to be. So, here's what I would say to you. If what you're looking for is a car that's going to tick all of your boxes, this is very unlikely to be it. As I started by saying, if you're driving a Toyota, probably there was a compromise involved somewhere. But I can tell you in the time that you own this vehicle, not only will it not disappoint you, well, unless you get an unlucky one. I mean, there's always an unlucky car in every single manufacturer. But not only is it not going to disappoint you, you are going to end up feeling that you made the right choice, because it won't disappoint. It tells you everything it has to offer, and it delivers that, and it will deliver it mile after mile after mile after mile. So, if you're in the market for one of these, take it out on a test drive, but be a little bit kind to it. Yes, there are acres of hard plastic. Yes, at the under or round about €50,000 price point, it feels like a lot of money for what always feels a little bit cheap in some aspects. But you won't recognize where that money's been spent until you put 70,000 miles on this car. Are there niggles? Yes, and there are lots of them. But believe me, you're not going to be thinking about that after you've put some serious miles down. You'll just be comfortable and smiling, because this car delivers everywhere that it's most important. Well, I've talked about lots that I like about the driving this car, and I think now I need to mention a couple of things which I think could be improved. The first of those is cabin noise. We're currently driving at around about 80 kilometers per hour. And as you can hear, I'm sure, on the soundtrack, the interior is far from quiet. And these are standard tires, so it's not as if we're working with anything complicated to take us off-road. But as you can hear, as I pick up on the speed even just a little, that cabin noise elevates quite significantly. So if you're somebody who really does have to have a quiet environment in their car, you really should check this out before you commit to it. The other thing I think that's probably worth mentioning is the way the driver's information is displayed. Yes, you have options, yes, you can change it round, but this mixture of the analog dials on the outer edges and the digital display in the middle isn't brilliantly thought through, and it doesn't pair well with the infotainment system. So if you really need to get information quickly, easily, and simply visually, this just isn't a great way of doing it. And obviously, although systems are updated, I don't see that that's something that's going to change on this car. So you really do have to try that to see if it's going to be something that you can live with. Now, that's an important side note. Although you can get this car now with either Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, it isn't necessarily standard to all models and trim levels. So check, because I'm telling you now, you are absolutely going to want to use one of those two things for navigation. We've spent an awful lot of time driving around the Alps trying to work with the in-car navigation system. Now, in fairness to any nav system, obviously the mountain's the worst place for that because of communication with any of the towers. But that aside, this system is just not pleasant to use. It works, it will get you to where you need to be, but you really need to hope there isn't any deviation as there was for us, like a road closure, because it doesn't play nicely with that. So, if you have a choice and you can just stretch your budget a little bit, then Apple CarPlay or Android Auto are a must as far as I'm concerned. Well, those are really the only negatives to the drive. Everything else works great, and in a fully digital world, I have to tell you, the air conditioning is a pleasure to use. It's really nice just to be able to reach out and get exactly what you want without spending any time thinking about it at all. Other than that, at these speeds and even slightly higher, the pitch and roll is actually pretty low compared to what you might expect, and there really isn't any significant disruption to your driving at all. Everything is perfectly managed, nicely balanced, and well finished. Now, for my taste, an SUV is an SUV, so unless you're going to spend an awful lot of money, I still spend my time thinking I'd be much happier off in a car, lower, faster, more dynamic. But if you're going to need to be that much higher up off the road, then it's difficult to see at this price point how that weight distribution could be much better managed than Toyota have managed to achieve. After all, there is a reason why this is amongst the best-selling SUV in its class. worldwide. Then please, on top of liking and subscribing, why not check these out? There's the Tucson versus the Tiguan. That is something you're really going to want to have a look at if you're interested in this car. And also, of course, the Mazda CX-5. Now that is a very interesting prospect, but don't take my word for it. Have a listen to what Thomas had to say.